Hey, how's it going? It's your boy Adam Warrior's Challenger Coach here to bring you the High-ELO tier list video with Q&A at the end, so let's get started. Starting off in the top lane, our S tier roster will be Jack, Set, Renekton, Fiora, Camille, Darius, Aatrox, while God tier we have Wukong. As for the changes to the list, first up we've got Darius going from A tier to S tier. Surprisingly, Darius does quite well in High-ELO right now with his positive win rates into things like Aatrox, Renekton, Mordekaiser, who are some of the most popular top laners even in High-ELO. Also, almost all of the High-ELO Darius players use the Ghost Trinity setup, which is a big help to the champion. Not to mention Ghost is getting buffed next patch, so Darius players are just foaming at the mouth over this change as he's already holding a 57% win rate and a 6% pick rate at Masters Plus, and this is only going to go up when that happens. Then we've got Hecarim going from B tier to A tier. Hecarim top after the buffs to his Q damage versus champions is quite a powerful top laner, with many pros and academy players testing out this new tech. There's a lot of different setups though that, some people like to use. Pros like to take teleport, for example. While there are also some interesting setups that are more solo queue focused, where you're going to take Ghost and Ignite, and sometimes even Leandries. To learn more about how to abuse this up and coming pick, check out our Hecarim top video. After that, we've got kind of a wild card change with Singed going from off the list to A tier. This champ kind of came out of nowhere in the top lane with a semi-new setup where Singed players are deciding to just start going Ignite over teleport and then going full AP with Rylai's Leandries. They just don't care anymore. They're just all about that laning phase, all about that carry potential. It causes them to be very lane dominant versus meta abusing Bork, Conqueror, healing bruisers like Jack, Set, Renekton, or even Aatrox doesn't really need the Bork. I thought it was a mistake at first when I was checking the stats because he did have a 60% win rate at Masters Plus and a little bit of a low sample size, but then I checked his Diamond stats and he's still got a 54% win rate there. So it seems like Ignite Singed is just the tech right now to beat all of the ridiculous amounts of healing in top lane. After that, we've got Maokai going from S tier to A tier. It's very similar to what happened to him on the Loyal list. When the nerfs hurt him a bit and he's no longer the most god tier tank in the world, then his play rate kind of plummets and so does his ranking on our tier list. Then we've got Aatrox and Fiora going from god tier to S tier. Both of these didn't really get any nerfs, or get any weaker. It's just Wukong is just that strong that they didn't deserve to be in the same tier as him. And I'll talk a little bit more about him in a bit. Before that though, Jace is going to fall from S tier to A tier, and that's because he was kind of borderline S tier last patch, but we feel he suits being A plus tier a little bit more this patch now that Aatrox and Fiora have descended from their god tier status. Urgot goes from A tier to B tier. This initial hype around the champion post-buffs with the Death Dance were, pretty good. But the hype has kind of died down as people have remembered how to play against this clunky machine in High-ELO, so he goes back down to being more of a niche or niche pick, whatever you want to call it. Garen will then go from B tier to off the list because he currently only holds like barely a 50% win rate and a pretty low play rate, so we shadow around him. He just isn't suited for High-ELO play unless his base stats are completely broken, and that's not the case right now. That means that our highlighted change will be Wukong going from S tier to God tier, as he is the god of top lane right now. He holds a 57% win rate, a 13% pick rate, and a 70% ban rate at Masters Plus. He's got a bunch of different setups too, and none of them seem to do better than the others. It just doesn't matter because his baseline kit is so strong currently, even after all the nerfs. You can build Bork, Death Dance, Trinity Force, Black Cleaver, any of those items in any order seems to work fine on Wukong. That's just how broken he is right now. He also has very little losing matchups in the top lane. Pretty much just Singed, Kennen, and Hecarim are doing well into him, who are all not that popular. And then he wins versus all of the meta top laners, like versus Aatrox, Renekton, Set, Darius, and not to mention, he is definitely really strong even in competitive play too. He's pretty much pick or ban in the LPL currently, and that just goes to show he's not just a solo queue stomper right now, he's just that good. He's extremely versatile, has that outplay potential with the W, he's got the damage, he's tanky, he's got the laning phase, skirmish, he pretty much has everything except for really long range, but he still has longer range than other melee champions, so he's got that going for him. Moving down to the jungle, our S tier roster will be Elise, Fiddlesticks, Rek'Sai, Olaf, and Kayn. And then in God tier, we've got Graves, Nidalee, and the lead singer. After the changes to the list, we've got Fiddlesticks moving from A tier to S tier. He currently holds a 57% win rate, a 6% pick rate, and a 15% ban rate at Masters Plus. Lots of High-ELO players have begun to adopt the way of the Fiddlesticks and adding him to their champion pools. Some of you might doubt the Fiddle though, and how strong he really is at the highest level of solo queue, and in fact I was a little doubtful too, as I think it's the first time I've ever seen a Fiddlesticks in S tier and High-ELO in all the years that I've been playing this game. But do not mistake this, even Riot themselves have admitted they completely overbuffed Fiddlesticks and that he's too strong and they plan to nerf him next patch, so definitely abuse him now while you can. Zac also went from B tier to A tier this patch, so he returns to A tier as one of the only viable tank junglers in High-ELO, and is best used versus AP heavy comps, kind of like a Mundo jungle, but actually good. Then Nidalee will actually go from S tier to God tier, as Nidalee, especially in China and Korea where low ping is very common, is destroying the ladder post buffs to her Qs. She holds a 58% win rate, a 15% pick rate, and a 14% ban rate at Masters Plus. She's one of those champions here. If you're better than the other jungler with better mechanics, you can just style on the entire early game. Then you pray to the enemy team at the FF early because you're one of the worst late game champions, but this doesn't matter because she's so overwhelmingly strong in the early game that she never gets to late game. Well, that and probably the Nidalee players spamming FF if she didn't win the early game anyways, so there's that. But back onto the changes to the list, we've got Echo moving from S tier to A tier. He's been kind of on the decline for a bit, mostly due to other junglers getting buffs while he doesn't get any, and roughly holds, around a 50% win rate, so we decided to drop him down to A tier, as every single jungler can't be Kayn and get buffed 9 times in a row until they're S tier. Shyvana and Jarvan IV will move from A tier to B tier. We're going to clean up the list a little bit here by moving Shyvana down due to her performance into kind of the heavy invade S tier jungle meta, and then J Money because he is versatile but he doesn't actually excel at anything currently in particular, so we're going to move him down too. Sinzel will also be moving from A tier to B tier. Just like on the loyal list, the initial hype around this champion's new setup died down where he's taking phase rush, as people remembered to just not fight him at level 2 and level 3, and then you can win because he's one of the ultimate center champions and terrible in the late game, while also having less agency to snowball than Nidalee does. Wukong and Sett will be moving from B tier to off the list, and we took these champions off the list because their play rates are below our 1% marker, meaning they are just too underplayed for high-low solo queue. And, even Sett, although he sometimes flexes the jungle competitive play for draft purposes, he isn't even picked that much in solo queue, so we're dropping them both. That means that our highlighted change for the jungle this patch will be Olaf going from A tier to S tier as one of the best early game junglers in the meta right now. It's super important for high-low solo queue as you can just run over the early game and force people at FF real quick. He can 1v9 in the early game extremely easily as he's going to win duels and even 1v2 sometimes. He's got solid ganks, extremely good invade, and he can solo objectives. Literally everything you want from a jungler in the early game. Very similar to what Nidalee does in a sense. Both are gods early and terrible in the late game and play off of early invades and neutral objectives to close the game out quickly. This is a really common strategy for high-low jungle mains as they have accepted that their role sucks in the late game, so they just end the game before that happens, or they spam FF because they lost a crab. Either one in my opinion. On to the mid lane. Our starting S tier roster will be Kassadin, Twisted Fate, Echo, Syndra, Talon, Yasuo, and LeBlanc, with our only god tier champion being Zoe. For our changes, we've got Talon going from A tier to S tier, who currently holds a 59% win rate, a 6% pick rate, and a 10% ban rate, which is actually hilarious because his stats went up in High-ELO post the nerfs, meaning that not only did those nerfs not do much in High-ELO, but only the fake Talon fans who weren't even good at the champion left. So, just keep that in mind, and that's why we're putting him back in S tier. Yasuo, on the other hand, is going from A tier to S tier because this champion is completely overperforming in multiple roles, mainly mid lane and AD carry, post buffs to Zeal in all ELO brackets. This champion is very similar to Ezreal and is the reason why so many other champions can't have nice things, because if you buff crit items, Yasuo gets too strong. And if you buff defensive items like Death's Dance, then both of them, including Ezreal, will literally just abuse these items. Man, these champions are actually so problematic. But anyways, that's why Yasuo is going to S tier. Zed, on the other hand, is going to be going from B tier to A tier. He's a very matchup dependent champion, but with the popularity of champions like LeBlanc, Kassadin, Twisted Fate, and even Syndra or Talon to a lesser extent, he has a lot of skill matchups that he can snowball off of, although I would admit we are putting him at the lower end of A tier. Syndra then moves from God tier to S tier. The God Queen is just a regular queen now post buffs to her stun. She just isn't as oppressive in the early game, so she can be punished easier in the laning phase if she actually messes up and misses her stun. Still strong though, as she can just QR Ignite to kill people after she misses anything anyways. Sylas, on the other hand, is going to move from S tier to A tier. His most common matchups in High-ELO are actually into Twisted Fate, Yasuo, and Kassadin. Though the TF matchup is somewhat even, the other two are not even close to even, and in fact, his win rate against Yasuo is even worse than against Kassadin, and Kassadin is considered an incredibly hard counter to Sylas. With the increase in Yasuo popularity, Sylas took a massive hit this patch, so we're moving him down. Last up, we have Ryze from B tier off the list. He's just a bad champ, so we're moving him out until this next rework. That means that our highlighted change for this patch will be Zoe going from S tier to God tier. With the God Queen of mid lane being dethroned, Zoe takes her place as the strongest High-ELO solo queue mid laner, who currently holds a 56% win rate, an 11% pick rate, and a 12% ban rate. This champion is one of the most infuriating to play against, as one misposition means you get one shot or chunked out so badly you need to go back to base. Either way, you're going back to base, which I mean is somewhat acceptable if that's the only thing that champion could do. But she's also a monster in skirmishes because of her W, which is one of the main reasons she does so well in solo queue. Her ability to snowball in the early game both in lane and through roams is top tier, which I suppose is once again acceptable if that's the only thing she could do. But nothing makes me more upset than seeing Zoe get redemption at level 3 when she's losing the laning phase, and then she just redemptions a cannon wave and gets a free base, or uses the redemption to heal her jungler when they're having a scuttle fight, and then they just win the game off of that. She's a champion that can just pick up wins off the chaos of the early game and her W picking up a bunch of flashes and autoing people to death, or she just rolls a certain item to win the laning phase. It's very silly. Into the bot lane we go though, with our starting S tier roster being Varus, Vayne, Kai'Sa, and Kalista, with our god tier being Ezreal and Aphelios. For the changes, we've got Misfortune going from S tier to A tier. Just like in the Loyalist, the nerf to her movement speed hurt quite a bit, and she didn't benefit as much as the other marksmen did from the buff, so we dropped her to A tier. Tristana will also be going from A tier to B tier. Though she counters Ezreal, she is pretty underwhelming in most other matchups, so we moved her down for now, but I could see her making a small comeback if the support meta shifts a little bit in her favor, or if, things like Vayne and Kalista become slightly more popular. Soraka will go from B tier to off the list. When Soraka was first buffed, this was quite a popular thing to experiment with, but since then the hype kind of died down, so her place off the list also died with it, as her pick rate is abysmal and it did not increase like predicted. That means that our highlighted pick for this patch will actually be Ezreal, who is a god tier champion. I actually want to take this time to talk about one of the god tier champs, either Ezreal or Aphelios, but I choose Ezreal just because people have a slightly different item path on him, which includes adding in Death's Dance. You can now do this with either the Trinity Force or the Frosted Glove setup. It doesn't really matter, but what this does is it makes Ezreal unkillable. It's already hard enough to kill him when the Ezreal's actually good and not an autofilled support or jungle main thinking they can just dice roll a win by missing half their Qs from max range. But this is an incredibly overtuned item. He can now play way more aggressive, shift into fights, looking to get those auto attacks off, knowing that he can survive if he gets hit by something. Though it is a defensive option for him and it does provide some utility in the CDR, which is nice for Ezreal, what it does is it allows him to output more damage in a fight than normal because he feels safer to auto attack during a fight, which actually increases his overall DPS even if he's buying a defensive item. It's very similar to how Zhonya's can be used offensively by champions like Kassadin, Fizz, Akali, because they know they can dive into a fight to get their burst off, and if they get focused, they can just hit Zhonya's. Like I said before, Ezreal and nice things, you can't have both of them in the same sentence. If Death's Dance is going to be really strong and Ezreal's going to abuse it, you know it's going to get nerfed soon. Bruiser's abusing Death's Dance, Riot's okay with that. Ezreal abusing Death's Dance, never going to fly. Last up for the Q&A portion, we have the support S tier roster of Nautilus, Karma, Senna, Lulu, not Nunu, Yuumi, and in God tier we've got Thresh and Bardo. For the changes, we've got Lux going from off the list to B tier. Post-buff to her E-slow, she is doing fine in High-ELO, not great, but good enough to warrant putting her on the list, as she does have decent matchups into things like Leona and Nautilus. Then we're actually going to add the Fat Man Gragas from off the list to B tier. This pick was featured in the recent LPL versus LCK matchups and has become popular enough to make this list with a 2% pick rate. Though he is commonly best paired with Yasuo bot lane, he does do very well with Kalista as well and has good matchups into champions like Thresh, Nautilus, and Bard. Xerath will then be moving from B tier to off the list. He got taken out and back to the Shadow Realm, as mage supports in High-ELO kinda suck right now and he's barely ever played. That means that our featured change this time around will be Nami going from B tier to A tier. She currently holds a 57% win rate and a 4% pick rate. Like many enchanters right now, Nami is thriving even in High-ELO. This is thanks to marksmen receiving buffs to help them be useful, which helps Nami be more useful as she has an extra pawn to protect. She's also one of the few enchanters who does well with both Ezreal and Aphelios during the laning phase, which is one of the main reasons she does well currently, as both of them are in god tier at the moment. Keep in mind that enchanters in particular are almost directly tied to how much synergy they have with the current S tier or god tier AD carry roster. If utility marksmen or mages are popular, enchanters kind of suffer a little bit. If crit hyperscaling ADCs are strong, then they are also strong. Of course, there are exceptions to this, like when Riot overbuffs certain things like Yuumi and Soraka recently, and then they're good with everything, or how Ezreal is so strong it doesn't matter who he lanes with or what team comp he has, he's still going to perform. But the general rule still stands. And with champions like Vayne, Draven, Yasuo, Aphelios, or even Jhin being quite popular, Nami does pretty well currently. Although she can still suffer to some of the, god tier or S tier champions like Thresh, for example. Starting up the Q&A section here, we'll be pulling questions from the Low-ELO tier list video. If you think this is actually a good idea or it isn't, let me know in the comment section below. Our first YouTube questions come from Sahid and then Calistralia. You guys kind of asked the same question, but with different champions, so I'm going to answer you both at the same time. One of you asked, where is Akali? A bunch of question marks. I don't see her in the mid lane or top list for Low-ELO. And the other one asked, Kiana question mark. Obviously, you guys forgot about her, so where would she be ranked question mark? First up, let's talk about Akali on the Low-ELO list, or, lack of presence on the Low-ELO list in either top lane or mid lane. And the reason, short form is she just sucks right now because after 200 years worth of nerfs in the mid lane, she holds a 45% win rate in gold, and then in top lane, she holds a 46% win rate in gold. Fun fact, even during her peak, she was never above 50% win rate in Low-ELO, or, barely even in High-ELO she ever reached that point. Not even close, and she spent most of her time around this kind of win rate bracket because she's simply too difficult mechanically and has zero tools to help her team out when she's behind. So not only do you need to execute and continue to execute, if anything ever goes wrong, you don't have a way to come back in unless you're extremely gifted on the champion. That's why assassins that don't have any kind of utility or are just difficult to teamfight with do terribly in Low-ELO. Kiana, on the other hand, is kind of in the same boat. She gets brought up a lot on these kind of tier list videos and why we don't talk about her. I have mentioned it in the past, but I'll mention it here. It's always kind of funny to me because she is mentioned a lot and she doesn't even have that high of a pick rate. It's only 2% in Low-ELO, and she also is kind of bad with a 47% win rate in gold because just like Akali, she's very difficult to win on. Many people in Low-ELO can actually play her mechanically, but winning on her is entirely different. Very similar to when I've answered this about LeBlanc, because she doesn't actually scale that well and her team fighting is hard to execute. You need to consistently find flanks on Kiana and hit a big ultimate, and if you fail, you do absolutely nothing in the fight and you lose the game and all the money that was on you is completely wasted. Champions who are not forgiving just do worse than Low-ELO the lower you go. That's just how it works. Our next YouTube question comes from Jesse, who asked, why is Blitzcrank in God tier? Just curious. Well, the Blitzcrank is in God tier in Low-ELO at the moment because most people are picking enchanters, things like Lulu, Janna, Karma, Soraka, Yumi, etc. And they're all pretty high up on the pick rate charts. Blitzcrank is the easiest to execute and most effective hook champion versus this support meta, as one hook usually leads to a kill and his ultimate completely destroys shields, which is very helpful when bursting people down, not just in the laning phase but in the mid game too. So as long as enchanters are popular, Blitzcrank will always be around to punish those champions, deny them the ability to freely scale from just being AFK in the laning phase. Next up, our first Instagram question comes from RGG, who asked, I always think about what makes Camille unplayable in Low-ELO while she is top tier and high. Any good explanation? Yeah, I have an okay one, I suppose. It's a combination of two things. The first is her matchups are very similar to Twisted Fate in a sense, where both him and Camille are playable into almost any matchup, but this comes at the cost of not having any hard winning matchups. I mean, not any, but just very few. This lack of polarizing strengths and weaknesses isn't as valuable on Low-ELO as you can't snowball early on just based off of champion strength differences. Hence why they both don't perform well in Low-ELO. You can't just pick Garen and end up versus a Riven who doesn't know how to play her champion and just automatically win. If you're playing Camille, you have to be able to execute your champion properly to actually gain advantages. But the main thing that is different from Twisted Fate and what makes it worse off for Camille is that, yeah, that technical aspect, that mechanical aspect is very difficult, and she is quite technical. Mess up the Q timing, miss a kill. Don't space the W properly, miss a kill. Miss your E, you're dead now. Mistime your ultimate, miss a kill, and you're likely dead, especially in a team fight. So when you combine a technical champion with very few hard-winning matchups, it's a bit of a disaster in Low-ELO compared to High-ELO, where her ability to snowball early on off a gank assist, then scale into a split push monster is very highly valued. Our next Insta question comes from Chun, who asked, I'm not a support main, but pressing E with Yumi shouldn't be hard, I guess? I actually want to address this question real quick and say that the difficulty rating for her was done based off of her original kit, which took people a pretty long time to learn when she was just released compared to her current version, and we do plan to redo her difficulty rating along with the rest of the champions fairly soon, so don't worry. That means that our last question comes from Esoteric, who asked, Ornn B tier why? Alright, I'll answer this one. Holds a roughly 51% win rate right now in gold, and though he is highly valued in competitive play, the reasons he gets picked aren't as useful in Low-ELO or just solo queue in general. He isn't doing well in High-ELO either. First up, let's talk about his ornaments, which is one of the main reasons people pick him. They only kick in past when solo queue games are normally already decided, and your team actually has to remember to even build items that you can upgrade, which is more of an issue than what you would think, because a lot of his power budget is in those ornaments. His ability to engage is also one of his primary strengths, but it's not a very straightforward engage. It's not like Malphite ultimate, and it's not easy to use either. That's why pros miss it so often. They miss the ultimate, or they mistime it, or they just come in to engage at the wrong time. So not only do you have to know when to engage, have your team follow up properly, but you actually have to execute the Ornn engage, which is harder than what you would think. Then of course there's tanks do worse in solo queue in general, because you need to have carries worth protecting to be useful. So only when tanks are super broken, like the last patch on Maokai, do they ever thrive in solo queue, and Ornn is just currently not in that state. That's all I got, so thank you very much for watching, and be sure to check out our other content on this channel, as well as on our site at mobalytics.gg. As always, I'm your host, Adam Moriarty Isles, and may the new and old solo queue gods be with you.